I'm really happy that we're having this forum today, since my mom, Millie Davis, and I have been talking about having such a forum for about 10 years now. What we noticed was that occasionally we would see or be part of some conversation that ended up going badly in some way, and we've always thought that one of the prime goals of humanism should be to help people to have more constructive and enjoyable and less destructive and unpleasant conversations with each other, since our conversations with others are such a huge determinant of our overall happiness and unhappiness. So we've talked about having some communication expert give us a forum on how to do that. That's what I'm hoping that this forum will be. There are two main topics that I'm hoping will be covered today. They are, one, how to avoid saying things that are likely to lead to unnecessary negative feelings and responses in your conversational partner. One example among many of how to avoid doing that is to use a lot of what I call statement softeners, such as, in my opinion, or it seems to me, or another possibility might be, those kind of phrases, instead of making absolute, sometimes almost godlike statements of fact, which I've often found leads to disagreements and even arguments. The second main topic that I'm interested in is how to respond when you feel that someone else has said something that's unnecessarily negative that is leading you to feel badly. Some examples of how to respond to such, quote, bad statements are to change the subject, acknowledge their statement, but then say, I have a different view, say that both people should agree to disagree, tell the other person that what they said seems offensive, or just end the conversation as soon as possible, or try not to discuss that subject with them in the future, or just avoid them altogether. So I'm hoping that our speakers today will have at least something to say about those two topics, which I think are crucial to significantly improving human conversational happiness and thus human happiness. Okay, the topic of the talk today is moving through difficult conversations with Paul Hebert, is that right?
Hebert.
Hebert, okay. Paul Hebert and Jeff Blum. Paul Hebert is the case manager for the Palo Alto and Los Altos mediation programs, which are administered by Project Sentinel. And he will briefly describe the services available through Project Sentinel and the mediation programs. Then he will describe the key elements of communication skills which mediators model and support to help resolve conversations that have gotten off track. He and a panel of other mediators will then take questions from the audience about challenging communication scenarios they have experienced and describe how a mediator would approach those conversations. In particular about Paul Hebert, he has had many roles in his 60 years. He has been one of 6 kids, a student, a singer-songwriter, a Catholic seminarian, a handyman, a store clerk, an engineer, a husband, a father, a divorcee, a Toastmaster, a motorcycle rider coach, again a husband, and most recently a mediator. Today he is our speaker and guest, although always though, he is Paul. So please welcome Paul.
Thank you. I'll retain my notes.
Oh, okay, sure.
There we go. And also, I'd like to introduce at this moment my compatriot here, Jeff Blum. Jeff is a family lawyer and family mediator, and also volunteers his time with the Palo Alto Mediation Program. He teaches a class over at Stanford on mediation, and he has also taught some mediation topics to high school students right here at Pali. So that's a little bit of who you have here. And I'll let you have a seat for a second, because I'm going to go on for maybe 25 minutes or half an hour. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some time with you this morning. I took a little bit of time to look at your website, find out who I was going to be talking to, and I was delighted because you've already done a lot of the heavy lifting associated with communication, I think. And hopefully your questions will take us to the next level down as opposed to just the surface. But I'm going to start us off with some basics when I get to that. Before I get to that, I've promised my boss that I would do an infomercial, and I also had that as part of the announcement. So let me describe a little bit about the programs I'm involved with in case you should have a use for them. I work at Project Sentinel. Project Sentinel is a nonprofit focused on housing issues. They've been around for over 30 years. They originated here in Palo Alto as part of a fair housing organization. And their three foci are fair housing, so that is to make sure that people who are housing providers, mostly landlords, are providing housing in a fair way and not discriminating on any of the bases that are against the law, both the federal and the local laws. So our Fair Housing Department has got lawyers who are there who understand the law, and they will work with people to help them understand, first of all, are you being discriminated against? And secondly, if you are, what can we do about it? We even do investigations of claims like that, and if we find cause, then Project Sentinel will file a complaint with the Housing and Urban Development folks, and they will take it from there. So we're involved in some lawsuits now and then, and you may read about it. That's the active arm of Project Sentinel. Project Sentinel has two other departments. The HUD department, which assists people with mortgage-related things. People who are facing potentially the loss of their home. There are lots of programs out there, some of them coming up, some of them going out. Our counselors try and keep abreast of all those different programs and provide assistance to the folks who are facing that need to match the correct program with the need that they're facing. And they also assist first-time home buyers to become qualified for a lot of those programs. So we provide classes so that first-time home buyers can then qualify for assistance that may be available. So that's two. The third one is the one where I live. It's the tenant-landlord counseling component. And in housing situations, tenant-landlord relationships are often difficult. Do I have landlords in the audience? Okay, so please understand that we serve both sides of the equation. We're providing counseling both to landlords and to tenants, although as you might guess, most of our questions and complaints come from tenants. And I'm the one that gets those calls for Palo Alto, for Los Altos, for Milpitas. When we get those calls, the first thing we try to do is just understand the problem, ask some questions, and provide information about what the civil code requires, or in your particular community, if there are rules, like Palo Alto has a few laws, ordinances that are in place specifically around tenant-landlord issues. We'll make sure everybody knows what those rules are so that they can assess their own choices with respect to them. And normally that's the whole process. I do not advocate for the landlord or the tenant. I simply try and make sure that they have all the information they need to fill their role well. Occasionally, these things don't go smoothly. And from that, there were mediation programs born. So Palo Alto and several other communities facing primarily tenant-landlord issues created a mediation program more than 20 years ago now. And it has expanded. So it used to be simply for tenant-landlord issues, my security deposit, you held back too much of it, or you trashed my apartment, or you're not taking care of the place, whatever, all that kind of thing. When those conversations get too difficult, either because the personalities involved or because the perceived power difference between them, they can ask for mediation. And here in the city of Palo Alto, mediation is free to anybody who's a resident, who's employed here, or who owns here. And so we mediate those kind of issues, plus neighbor issues, landscaping, fences, noise, things like that. So all of those kind of problems, we encourage you, if you're having difficulty or you know someone who's having a hard time, the conversation has fallen off the rails, is how I describe it, we can help them get it back on the rails. Now, Project Sentinel is identified as the administrator of those programs. Basically, the Palo Alto program is your own program. It's a city program. It was created by the Office of Human Relations here, and it's independent of Project Sentinel. But they needed somebody to answer the phones and keep the records. And Project Sentinel provides these other counseling supports, and there's a need for mediation in a lot of those, so we kind of made a deal where they pay us a little bit to support my salary, and I answer the phones, and I'm the initial point of contact. I do that for the Palo Alto mediation program, for the Los Altos mediation program. We have mediation programs also in Mountain View, and all three of those communities have their own mediation panel. That is a panel of residents, like Jeff, who volunteer their time to mediate when the need comes up. And Project Sentinel simply coordinates. And I love that I came in and saw that we're half sheets here because I produced these little half sheet handouts for you. So on one side is Project Sentinel and the various communities that we serve here on the peninsula, and phone numbers for that, a couple of websites, so you have that information available to you. Now the mediation, I want to say just a little bit about mediation. How many of you have ever participated in a mediation process? Oh, this is wonderful. Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir. I like that. It's a very simple thing. If someone is facing that difficulty with a neighbor or, you know, a family relation or, you know, a tenant or a landlord, you call us. I answer the phone. I say, hello, you know, this is Paul with the mediation program. And you start to describe your problem. And I will describe mediation just like this. I will say mediation is, first of all, confidential. So everything about my conversation with you and my conversation with the other party, when I speak to them, is confidential. I don't share anything unless somebody permits me or requests me to do that. And even if a court summons me afterwards, if things go terribly badly, I get to say, I'm sorry, but as a mediator, I'm protected by the evidence code, and I'm not allowed to comment on what I heard in mediation. So it's confidential, number one. Number two, it's voluntary. Nobody can be compelled to mediate. So if the two parties do not agree to come together and join in mediation, it's not happening. And the third thing is that that we, the mediators, are neutral. So when you are in the position of mediator, you are not there to say who's correct and who's wrong. And that's one of the first parts of the conversation is, okay, if you agree to mediation, you need to understand that your mediators are not going to listen carefully and then explain to the other person why you're right. Okay, that's not going to happen. What we will do is practice our listening skills, model the good skills for communicating to make sure that what you need said gets said and heard, and you feel heard, and the same thing for the other party. And if at the end of that you find you have more stuff on the table to work with, then you may be able to find a solution in all of that mess that you've just regurgitated out there. If you find a solution, great, we can help you memorialize it. If you don't, no harm, at least you've had an opportunity to communicate. So that's the basics of the mediation program. And if you know people who have that need, we encourage you to put them in touch with us. It doesn't cost anything. You're finding out, I hope, that I have a pleasant voice. I'm actually nice to talk to on the phone, too. So feel free to have somebody call me and ask for that help. Now, regarding the next piece of what I'm going to say, I've been introduced as an expert. And I have to say, looking around here and listening to the introduction and reading what you stand for, I feel like I'm up here in this room. And I suspect that all of you have got expertise you bring in this area, places where you shine that I'm going to probably describe here. So hopefully I'll just put it all, you know, out there in a recognizable blob, and you can say, oh, when it puts it all together like that, it makes a little extra sense to me. The way I'd like to handle this, I'm going to talk about listening, asking questions, and making statements. And for each of those, I want to first talk to you about how it goes wrong, and secondly, some ways that you can improve the quality of your participation in it. I liken this to, I was actually looking for shoes the other day, and I went into Big Five sporting goods. I think if you go into any sporting goods store, I am stunned anymore by how many different kinds of shoes there are for how many different kinds of things. But if you bicycle, if you play tennis, if you play basketball, if you jog, if you walk, you can get special purpose shoes for that. And one of the things about entering into any of those sports things is people will invest in that. They will put their money down to get good quality equipment, and if you buy shoes like that, it behooves you to tie the shoelaces. If you don't tie the shoelaces, it will have been a terrible waste of money to go out on the court with your tennis shoes untied like that, because you will cause your own problem, a self-inflicted error. And the errors that I'm going to describe about communication are in that category, I think, for the most part, self-inflicted errors. So I'm going to encourage you to tie your mental shoelaces, and then offer some ways that you can refine the positive qualities of the communication. So the first piece is listening. You're all listening to me very attentively. I can feel it. I enjoy that. I listened very carefully when my wife introduced herself. She introduced herself as, married to me today. I'm hoping it's persistent. So we listen, okay, and what are some of the ways that we trip ourselves when we are trying to listen? Well, the very first way is you have got a whole collection of voices inside your head. Your self-talk. Okay, the thoughts that you're having as I speak. You're going, okay, well, I'm liking this guy, or oh, gee, I wish he would get to the point, or something like that, right? You have inner chatter that goes on. You may know some of the other people in the room and have their voice in your head as well, where you're thinking, oh, this is going to set this person off, or something like that. So there are all these voices in your head. Okay, after you've been around for a little while, there's quite a collection in there. The way you can trip yourself up easily is to be distracted by those. I took some classes in coaching, and when you are acting as a coach, one of the first things they tell you is you need to manage that self-talk. They called it the level 1 listening. That's the listening that happens inside your head. Nobody else can hear it but you hear it loud and clear, and you need to kind of turn around and go, shh, to those voices. Say, I know you guys, you're here, I appreciate your presence, and not now. Okay? They want you then to focus your listening out there. So the very first way that we trip up is we're planning what we're going to say, we're planning our rebuttal, we're having all kinds of associations and things like that, instead of simply listening to the person who's talking to us. And that's an easy way to trip. And when you get caught not listening that way, then you have to recover. Okay, so that's another way that the second tier self-inflicted wound is someone is talking to you and you're sort of listening to your own inner voice, and something important goes by and they notice you didn't catch it, and they call you to task for that. Oh, no, I was listening. No, really, I heard everything that you said here. I can repeat it to you. Okay, and hopefully you can recover, but now you're backpedaling, right? You are trying to recover from the error. And when you're trying to recover from any misstep, including one of the ones that Brian described early on, where you say something and it has a poor impact and you're like, oh my goodness, that's not what I wanted to happen. All right, you can be overwhelmed by that, or you can simply look at it and say, oh, that's interesting. That's not what I expected at all. So the first way that you can trip up is by having those inner voices managing you. And the second way that I wanted to talk about is just that last bit. Don't take it personally. Okay, you may have read Miguel Ruiz's book, The 4 Agreements. I think it's now the 5 Agreements. And the very first one is don't take it personally. The things that people say to you, even the things that they say to you that seem directed at you for hurtful intent, are not about you, they're about them. And if you can let that go, don't take it personally, take a mental break, a moment, just is when a dart comes at you, you go like, ooh. You can say ouch, that's okay, but then before you go ahead and respond, to just step back and go, that's odd, right? I did not expect that. So there's the 2 ways that you can trip while listening. What can you do to make your listening excellent? Well, once you've calmed those inner voices, then of course you want to pay attention to the person who's speaking. And I want to recommend that you pay attention on multiple levels. So that my coaching community called the inner listening level 1 listening. They call this level 2 listening when you are providing focused attention to the person who is speaking to you. And you're giving them all of your attention. Now sometimes That can be a little overwhelming, okay? You don't want to give somebody too much attention. I've got you. No, I'm paying attention. I'll notice every darn thing you do, okay? And I can feed it back to you. So you want to manage that, okay? But you want to give them full attention, rich attention. And the other listening level that they talked about for me was level 3 listening. And they called that listening to the whole room, listening to the space. And that was about, I got confused when they told me that, and so I said, I'm not getting it. I don't quite get this level 3 thing where you're, where you're listening to the whole room. I'm the one that's talking here. Why would the whole room be? They say, well, you become the weatherman for the room. And they made me, for the rest of that training day, the weatherman for the room. Every once in a while, they'd check in with me and say, what's the weather in here? Okay, so right now, the weather in here is curious. It's got a little bit of that calm before the storm feeling to it. And I heard about the way you do your second part here, the question and answer part, so I'm ready for that. But basically, that's describing the weather. There's a little bit of coolness. There's a feeling of intelligence in the room. Okay, we're in Palo Alto. You know, I could reasonably expect everybody is well educated, but I also feel it. It's like it's working my brain. There's like, oh yeah, be careful. You got to keep your comments consistent here, or they're going to catch you. So that's a little bit of the weather, level 3 listening. When you listen on multiple channels. So you don't simply listen that focused attention. You do give them your full attention, but you also let stuff come into you from the atmosphere. And you let stuff come into you on other channels. One of the channels that frequently gets ignored when we think we're listening is our own body channel. Okay, when somebody says something that makes you tense, that's a good thing to notice. So your listening wants to take that in and occasionally comment on it. All right, you're letting people know the impact that they're having. Okay, and if you're not paying attention to those things, then you don't have it to report. So when you're listening, you quiet the voices, you listen attentively, you take in the space, and you allow it to come to you in multiple channels. Now, as humanists, you may not think of a spiritual channel necessarily, but you've got plenty of others. Your auditory channel, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, okay, what you're noticing, that is the associations that you're making. So all of that stuff is part of your listening. So that's listening. Second, so there's tips on how to make it better, and there's things to watch out for tripping. Now let's talk about questions. When you ask respectful questions, that's the way I coined it on these sheets here. So on the other side of the sheet, oh, by the way, before I go too much further, there's the Project Sentinel information, and then below it there are some books. These are my absolute recommends for anybody interested in communication skills. They're all very readable, and a lot of what I'm saying is coming from them. And then on the back side, there's my little outline for the things I want to say. So respectful questioning, a lot of this comes from Sharon Ellison's book, Taking the War Out of Our Words. She wrote this book because she noticed that most conversations have a warlike quality. If you stop and you think about it, a lot of conversations we enter to win. Okay, and when you're a humanist and you're talking to someone who's not, I noticed in the introductions there's a certain quality that you want to be careful of, those soft openings that Brian was talking about, where you don't want to ruffle the feathers over there. You want the communication channel to still be open, and you want to be able to express your view, have them express theirs without anybody feeling wrong in the moment. Okay, so that quality there of the possibility when you enter a conversation that it will be one person trying to prevail, trying to drive their point home, that is very normal in our society. I think we're socialized to do that. Debate clubs, okay? So many conversations are debates, essentially. They come down to, oh, I see that you are benighted in this way. I think I can help. And then you proceed to do it. As opposed to a two-way communication, One of the books in here called Crucial Conversations, written by Patterson et al., they have a concept they call the shared pool of meaning. The objective of any conversation is to increase the shared pool of meaning. And whenever what you're saying or doing is having the opposite effect, that's something to notice. All right, so when you're asking questions, how can you trip? The biggest way that you can trip is to abuse the question. Using a question to make a point is probably the most frequently done one, and Sharon spends a bit of time on this in her book. We are exposed to that from early on. That's how our teachers teach us. You've heard of the Socratic method. We try to draw it out of you. So this whole notion of trying to draw it out of somebody by asking a question, well, did you really think that it was going to be okay to park there? Or all these kind of things. You're trying to make a point, but you're using a question. How many times has this happened to you? And how does it feel? Mostly, I think it feels busted or no but. You're mistaken. So either I'm feeling busted or you're wrong is the result of a question applied like that. So it's an easy way to trip. Don't do it. Use questions for only one thing: when you're curious and you don't know. I spoke to several lawyers because a lot of my friends who are mediators have come from the legal profession. And when we teach the class, I teach the class for the Santa Clara County, we get a lot of lawyers in there. They have the hardest time with this. And I've been told more than once that a lawyer never asks a question they don't already know the answer to. It's to draw that information out into the room why the question is asked. So you need to be vigilant not to use them that way. It's you having a conversation with their mouth. Okay, it's not respectful. So how do you have a respectful question? Well, first of all, keep it focused on making sure you're understanding what they're trying to say. When somebody is talking to me and I don't get it in some particular, I'll ask. When someone is talking to me and I think I get it, but I realize that there's an assumption associated with it, I'll ask. Okay? When somebody says something that triggers another question for me, I will ask it. I will dive down underneath it. So I will stay with what they're trying to say. And people are always trying to tell you what's important for them. So I have confidence going into any conversation. When I'm listening, I know they are trying to get something across, and I will work with them. So that's why I use my questions, to work with them on getting their point across. All right, so the last point here is when you're making statements. How do I share my stuff out there without causing problems? All right, and the simplest way is to be very, very careful to only share your stuff. So the way that we trip up is we tell people what they think, or we tell them what they meant, or we tell them, what is true, whether it's from God or some nearby authority. And if the nearby authority happens to be me, it comes across the same way. It's like, I'm communicating a universal truth to you, and I'm going to keep at it until you get it, okay? You can predict how that's going to fail. Right, so when I'm communicating what I have to communicate, and I think Brian, again, already made this point for me, you have the soft startup. You say, this is what I saw, this is what I heard, this is what I made of that. Okay, here's the conclusions that I'm drawing from that. Did you intend for me to get it that way? Okay, one of those questions you can ask, that's an abuse of the question, is you didn't, this is a statement actually, you didn't say, and then you repeat the words you said. I know what you meant. You meant something very different than what you said. I know what you meant, and let me tell you what you meant. So this is a good way to just fall into a terrible conversation. So the vigilance on your part is to always be sharing what I know. Guess what? You're the #1 expert. There is no one in the world who knows more about what you saw, what you heard, what you felt than you. Nobody can gainsay you that. So if you will stick to that and help the person on the other side stick to that, so when they go ahead and tell you what you're thinking or what you said or things like that, then instead of saying, no, you're wrong, say, it's interesting that that's what you heard from me. Tell me a little bit more about what you heard. Go ahead and be curious. So when you are doing the part of communication where you're going out to them, vigilance to speak from your experience only and to offer your opinions as exactly that, your opinions, can make a huge difference in the quality of the conversation you have. So those are the three. I'm suspecting you haven't heard too much that's surprising here. And I think that in our society we are habituated towards all of these mistakes. We are habituated to walking out there with our shoes untied when we step into conversations. If you watch the news, if you read the newspaper, you see it over and over and over again, right? The whole notion of spin and control and all of that is woven into our society. The concept of power, whether we have power in our roles or power in our bearing, or power in our size or any of those kinds of things, we're taught to use it. And that is an enemy of communication. And so most of the ways that we trip up are related, I think, to the way that we try to jockey for position in that conversation, so that even if we don't win the conversation, at the very least we get a draw. And if it's about that, then it doesn't end up with much added meaning on the table. So those are my suggestions around conversations. Now, I am in conversations every day from 9 to 4 where people call me and tell me what's wrong with somebody else. And so I'm very practiced at listening to that side of it and trying to harvest the information that they're actually trying to communicate, and at self-managing the part of me that wants to tell them what they ought to do. Okay? And I think when I come home exhausted, honey, a lot of times it's because I spent the better part of the day going shh, shh, shh to my inner voice. Don't say that. Don't say that. All right, so I've spoken for the half hour that I promised I would. And this is the part where we're going to open it up some. Now, I'm told that it's important for the memorializing of your conversations, because you record these sessions, that whoever's speaking has a microphone. Not because we can't hear you, but because they want to make sure it is captured by the recording. So I guess we have a few people with microphones. And I'm going to invite Jeff up here with me, and we'll maybe share this thing if, depending. So we're here as a resource to you as two people who have been many, many times standing in the middle of people whose conversation the wheels fell off. Okay, and in Jeff's case, I think many times when the wheels fall off, they're thinking of going to court. And they've hired him in that capacity. And occasionally, I think he may be able to talk him down to, let's try mediating first. And if that doesn't work, we can go to court, okay? Or something like that. But that's the wheels falling off and the car getting wrecked on the tree, right? So what sort of questions or comments do you want to make?
Okay, so I'll bring the mic around to people who raise their hand, get my eye, let me know you have a question. I'm going to try to do the thing we've been doing recently of trying to give people who've never asked a question before the mic. So just keep, okay?
I'm a career coach, and one of the things that seems like it's worked well is a question, but not to make a point, but rather when they're dealing with a difficult personality like their manager, that they say things like, what would happen if, one thought I had, what do you think of that? Rather than saying must do this, you're trying to make a suggestion to a difficult person, but do it with a conditional and soften it with a question like, what would happen if, have we ever tried this? And you're still communicating what you want to do, but you're not saying we must have it, we must do it, and then you're dealing with a really difficult person who's opinionated. So I was wondering, is that slightly different than making a point?
So let me ask you, I love talking to coaches because coaches are used to this thing. Well, what if you know, what if you did know the answer to your own question is the most aggravating thing that coaches usually ask me when I've hired them to do this with me. And there's a certain quality of, all right, if you're trying to draw something out in me, and here's what then it's going to feel like a difficult conversation, because it may be more of a can you get it, or, you know, will I give it to you kind of thing, as opposed to this is what I want. So when you described that, the part that my also listening, the secondary listening captured, was very difficult person. When you're dealing with a very difficult person, I would want to dive in a little bit to, I'm having difficulty being in this conversation with you, and here's why. When I see this, when I hear that, then I start to back up and wonder, you know, how am I going to communicate my idea without it getting shot down? So that's more of me speaking from my interest and my position than me trying to manage the difficulty that you present me. Does that make sense?
It does, but there are a lot of situations where somebody has a lot less power than you, and their opinions are not listened to, and they want to make a suggestion, but they want to soften it so that the person doesn't feel like you're confronting them directly, but getting the point across.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen that work over and over again, where you say, have we ever tried this? You know, one thing I thought of, tell me if I'm wrong, like that, rather than trying to hit them straight up.
This is what Brian was suggesting, the sort of the soft startup, and while I agree that it's effective, and I'd be curious if Jeff wants to comment on this.
Well, one thing that comes to mind for me is you always want to try and keep the conversation safe and non-threatening, and try and commit to a mutual purpose. I think you're kind of getting to that point. In the language that you're using, you want to make it clear to your employer, your boss, whomever it may be, who's in that higher power position, that you have the same goal as them, as improving the work environment or improving, you know, the product, whatever you're making, and so that you can even say that, look, we're on the same page with this. We want to. How are we going to make this better? We're doing great, but, you know, how do we make this product better? How do we make communication or our relationship better?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What we're framing them as questions, but the person with a low IQ is not going to, it's hard to hit them straight up in disagreement, so you have to.
But you're saying it in a non-threatening way. You're keeping it safe. You're keeping the conversation safe. You want to make like you're stepping into that person's shoes and saying, you know, gee, you have a tough job to do. How can I make your job easier? But there's nothing wrong with asking questions so long as they're non-threatening. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your great presentation. And I have a two-sided question, or a double question, I should say. Number one is, if you were a professor of psychotherapy, would you teach this to the students? That's the first part of the question. The second one, let's say you're the sales manager.
Hear that. What was the
psychotherapy.
Yeah.
You're teaching people to become psychotherapists. Right. Would you teach them this so that they practice this, and then when they open up their business, that they use it with their patients? And number two, if you are, let's say, the sales or marketing manager of a high-tech company, would you also advise them to their salespeople to use this with their potential customers?
Oh boy. So first of all, I would advocate speaking this way with every human being. So whatever your relationship is, if you are trying to put points across, then put them across, you know, say, this is what I believe, this is what I'm here to share, okay, in that regard. So if it's about communicating something outward. And the second question that you asked was about the teaching it to the sales force. How many of you get those robocalls in the evening? Yeah, you know, and basically somebody has a script that they're reading for that has been designed carefully designed so that any idiot can sit, and that was a terrible thing for me to say, to sit and, you know, read it to you over the phone and watch for your response. And if you don't give them the expected response, then they go to statement B or question C, you know, and all of it is designed. It's a designed conversation. You know, would you please do this dance with me? And at the end of the dance, say yes to the sales pitch. And I think a lot of selling is taught that way. But the selling books that I have read that I appreciated are the ones that talk about creating a relationship between you and the other person. Okay, a little bit what Jeff was talking about is find your common purpose. I sell this great widget. I believe it's something that someone in your position could use to good effect. You know, and I'm here to make sure you understand the opportunity. That's exactly how I promote the mediation process when I'm talking to people who are reluctant to join. I say, look, I'm not here to sell you on mediation, but it is important for me that you understand what opportunity is there for you. Once it's clear to me that you understand it, if you choose not to, if you say, no, that doesn't feel like a fit for me, I'm going to respect that choice and thank you for your time. And I would love to be in any sales conversation that could end like that. You know, I want it to be about informing us both so that we can make intelligent choices based on what's there in front of us.
Yeah, Jerry Grass. You said that there were about 4 or 5 kinds of listening to do, and I was thinking, you know, if I try to do all 4 or 5 at the same time, well, I'm not that good at multitasking. So, what is one supposed to do?
Thank you. You know, there was an article that was brought to my attention earlier this week, and I wrote this down so that I wouldn't forget. Julian Treasure, he has a YouTube video out there about 5 ways to listen, or five things you can do to make your listening better. And it's about exactly that. If you don't feel good at it, and I did throw out there that you want to listen on all those channels. Actually, I think you do listen on all those channels, but you only belatedly come to the information, you know, on reflection most of the time. The only way to get good at it is to practice it. And he suggested a few ways to practice. And one of the things he suggested, this is to improve your listening skills, is every day create 3 minutes of silence. If you can stand it. Okay, 3 minutes of silence. That was one way. And it attunes you to just what that channel is like if there's nothing trying to occupy it. And then he said, listen to a soundscape, a big soundscape, and identify, he called this the mixer, identify as many of the different channels that you can. When my wife and I were walking the other day, we were listening to where are all the sounds that we're hearing coming from? You know, oh, there's the playground over there, there's birds here, seems to be a back and forth between these 2 birds. There's cars over on Santa Teresa, some of them don't have mufflers. There's, you know, this and that going on, a little bit of rustling. So there were all these threads within the soundscape, and by simply practicing picking them out, you can get better at it. So he was recommending those 2 things, and then one other was just that listening richly to one sound. You know, sit by that water fountain and listen to it and describe it in every detail to yourself. Like notice the texture of the sound that it's making, the impact on you, all of that. I don't know if this will help quickly, but I think if we create a practice like that, then it will. My suggestion also is to begin to have a practice of being open to the fact that we do take in information on all these channels all the time. And so if you can let your attention move between them in a way that doesn't steal from any one of them, I think you can get good at it.
Yeah, I would add, you know, there are classes where you can spend the whole day just discussing or learning how to be better at attentive listening. And it does, like Paul said, it takes a lot of practice. Body language is very important. Being open, not, you know, obviously not being in this kind of position. It can include, you know, using the same cadence as the other person who's speaking is using. Reframing what they say in a constructive way, so they recognize that you are listening, but you're trying to put their words in a little more productive, constructive way. But yeah, I mean, it's a process. It takes a lot of practice and experience. You can do it when you're just in a regular conversation with your friend or neighbor or girlfriend, whomever. But it does take a lot of work.
We have another one back here.
Thank you for mentioning Sharon Ellison's work. I heard about this, the power of non-defensive communication on KPFA radio, and I really liked it. And I've also been learning about nonviolent communication, and I was wondering, for the purposes of resolving conflicts in the housing situation, would you recommend that we employ both techniques, or what?
So that's a big scope there. So Sharon Ellison's work is taking the war out of our words was the title of the book. She calls the practice powerful, non-defensive communication. And the essence of it is to be careful not to fall into a defensive space, and also make it safe enough for the other person that they don't have to be in a defensive space. And then real communication back and forth can happen. The NVC community, nonviolent communication, and Marshall Thurgood's, is that right? Marshall Rosenberg, thank you. His book and his process had a lot to do, I'm going to get this wrong, I just know it. Any help?
You talking about the 4 steps?
Go ahead and share a little bit. It's like you need to get that wheel running in my brain. Well, anyway, I do think that there's a basic, the essence of it is, on the NVC side, from what I understand, is you want to listen for the need. Okay, when someone is in a difficult conversation with you, they have been frustrated in meeting a need, and that they are clumsy trying to meet their need doesn't make their need irrational or invalid. So you're seeking to sort of step around the difficulty, to talk about being with a difficult person, of the momentary conversation, and listen carefully and assess the need. And I think that the PNDC, Sharon's work, has a more practical do this, do that, about how you make your statements, about how you form your questions. And I think you can blend the two, because the NVC stuff feels to me like it goes to the essence, and Sharon Ellison's work feels very pragmatic. So by putting the two together, I don't think you have an either or, I think you have a yes and.
All right, so given what you were just talking about, I'm just going to ask my quick question. Sometimes both people are coming from places of need, and they don't really have what it takes to pull this off as cleanly as you've presented it. Even though we might be well versed in it, sometimes we can get caught. And then both people are caught. I think that might be a lot of what we're talking about here.
So you mean, you have a situation where...
Try again.
You have a situation, sorry about that. The parties are committed to a mutual purpose, but they somehow can't get to that mutual purpose. Is that kind of what you're...
They may be committed, but not very clearly. That didn't kind of happen in a really clear way. It's people, that are... I mean, I've been here, I don't know, thousands of times over the last 30 years. We think we're working in this direction, and then we find out, we get to a point, we really haven't clarified that we're working in that direction and how much we're committed to it. It's a lighter kind of commitment. It's not a well-said one. It's, you know, it's not like you step into this room or this space and you all commit to speaking like this. It happens more haphazardly that we get into tough situations.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, like when I'm talking to landlords and tenants, they seem to be at cross purposes. The landlord has a need, you know, to get their money paid on time. Okay, they want the rent to come in on time, and when that repeatedly doesn't happen, they feel like they must take action. The tenant feels like they're about to lose their home, and the difficulties they're having paying on time, you know, have to do not with any unreliable quality that they have, but the circumstances they find themselves in. Their needs seem like they're two different needs in opposition. When I have these conversations, what I want to do is bring forward, if they need the assistance, then the mediation provides a space where we can slow the conversation down enough in a place where your needs aren't urgent in this moment right here, and you can express them, and they can express them, and then we can say, all right, given that you have either that shared need or those two disparate needs, but you're bound in a relationship here, can you see a way working together to meet that, to meet both sets of needs? Okay, and one of the ways that has happened frequently in the tenant-landlord world is we say, look, the rent is due on the 1st of the month, but the way I get paid, I don't have the funds assembled until the 6th of the month because I get a Social Security check or I get a whatever on that whatever date. Can we shift the date that it's due? And you will reliably get paid every month on that date, and I will not have to worry about keeping my housing. Oh, okay. Okay, so that's two distinctly different needs, and unless they can share that that's what the need is, and it's not that I need to get rid of you, you're a bad tenant, okay, because I'm not a bad tenant.
Yeah, just one quick point. One of the things, a big part of the mediation process is obviously when you're brainstorming and you're putting out all your ideas, all your thoughts, and anything goes. And the more you do that, the more you're going to be able to focus on what it is your goals are and what each person's goals are, and be able to obviously first you want to identify the issues. And so you spend time doing that, and you hope that people don't have hidden agendas, which sometimes they do. So you're identifying the issues, discussing them, letting anything go, and then you get into a brainstorming session where hopefully you're going to focus in on what is important and what isn't important. I don't know if that helps any, but.
I have a question about my own family. My family is wonderful, but I would describe them as highly combative. And I just love your recommendations here, but in my family, my experience is that you're lucky if you get out, if you're given the opportunity to say as many as 8 words before you're completely shut down. Never 2 sentences. And so the question is, how does one even begin to persuade people that there are techniques that we could use?
First of all, you have to start with ground rules. Every mediation session starts with ground rules for the session. One ground rule is that each person's going to have a chance to talk. You don't interrupt. You be respectful. If you have something you want to say, you write it down, your chance will come. So I don't know if you can do that in a family context, but you sort of have to do that. Establish some ground rules, otherwise you're not going to get very far in the process, and you're going to get into a situation where people are just arguing over one another and you're not making any headway. So it's really, we start off with identifying who we are and what the mediation process is about and how it's voluntary and is usually very successful. And then we get into a list of ground rules, and you get buy-in from everybody who is participating. They have to buy into the ground rules. Do you accept these ground rules? Okay, great. And then the other tool that we sometimes use is, taking a break, caucusing, meeting separately, doing whatever you can to diffuse the situation when things get a little out of hand. But the most important thing is you have to have ground rules.
Do you think that would work there?
Everybody is a really good person, and what they need is to settle down and understand that they can do things in a better way. And like I've said, I've never been able to get past 8 words, or 2 sentences into 2 sentences. So maybe ground rules might be a way to get people to listen.
Or have them take my class.
Maybe so.
To have them take a mediation class, that would be an interesting solution.
Maybe so.
The other
maybe
thing,
so.
before we go to the next question, I want to demonstrate listening on multiple channels. Have you been hearing the referee whistles? Mm-hmm. And as I was listening to you speak, suddenly I heard the referee whistle loud come through somewhere, and I thought, oh, I wonder if someone at the table would mind being the referee every once in a while. You could move the role around.
Interesting point. Interesting point. Thank you very much.
My question is similar to what the first speaker, the speaker before me said. And that is, does this help in your discussions or arguments with your wife? I mean, I'm not trying to be funny about it, but I think it'd be very helpful, because I think your presentation is wonderful. And if we could all learn these ways of relating, it would be helpful not only in public, but in private relationships.
I will thank you so much for that question. Remember, there's one of these notes here about entrapment. However, I have to tell you all that when we met, the thing that drew us to one another was not how sexy we each thought the other one was. It was what a remarkable experience it was to have conversations and to get stuck and to be able to continue. And when we got married, we wrote it into our vows that whenever something comes up that doesn't feel right or feels off to either one of us, we commit to go there in the conversation and to stay there until it's complete. Go there, stay there. So in a relationship, see, one of the things in the Crucial Conversations book, they talk about a crucial conversation as a conversation where the stakes are high, emotions are high. Okay, and in those, and where that happens a lot is in intimate relationship conversations. The stakes are huge. This person is so important to you. And when the stakes are huge like that, the opportunity to make a big blunder is also fairly large. It's nice to be able to have as part of our agreement that we will make space, trusting the goodness that brought us together, to be there when we sit down to try and notice, why does this feel so bad right now?
Yeah, to add to that, one of the critical things that we haven't really talked about today is the concept of taking responsibility for your own behavior. And sometimes we mess up. I've done it. I tell a story about how my daughter Julia was back east going to school, and she wasn't communicating well. And so I wrote this great email to her about it, how upset I was and how important our relationship was. And then I zinged her. I said, so much for your statement to me when I was back east for your graduation that you were going to do better at communicating. Well, that wasn't productive. So the idea is, we all mess up. And it's important to take responsibility when you do. And just say, look, I'm sorry I was wrong. Taking responsibility for your behavior is a great way of showing the other person you are committed to walking down a new path together.
Hi. Oh, okay. Yes, this is yet another extension of what Marie said, and I don't think it's quite the same thing, though. I have a friend whose general mode of conversation is very combative, so we don't have to have a particular issue that we're disagreeing about. Just, you know, I may be relating a story, and she'll interrupt or whatever and say, well, did you try this? Did you try that? And with a hidden agenda, kind of like, you should have tried this, you should have tried that, or why didn't you do this? So it just is always a back and forth, and often I don't realize until, you know, I've either hung up the phone or had a few minutes alone, that my stomach is kind of churning. And but I've become very aware of it generally over the years, very old good friend. But I've gotten to the point where sometimes I will say, look, I just don't want to talk about it anymore, or something, and that's not only not productive, I say it with kind of a nasty tinge, and you know, we hang up the phone or something, and I feel worse, because then we've had a really more of an official argument. So how would you handle that kind of situation with someone who is like chronically argumentative, and even at this point combative? It's just sort of a conversational mode.
Do you know what I like doing when people do that is you commend them for being so interested in your problem and issue, and you commend them on how they do it in such a productive, non-threatening way. And they'll think about it.
You mean I lie?
Yeah. And they'll think about it and say, well, gee, from now on, maybe I should soften it a little bit because maybe it was a little too harsh. But it's kind of a roundabout way of getting them to be more constructive in the way they engage you in conversation about whatever it is you're talking about. Sometimes it works.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It's not, just to make it maybe more clear, I'm not sure, but maybe there is not a better answer, but it's not that she's picking and telling me I'm doing something wrong necessarily. It's just a general response to almost everything, it seems, is just that, just sort of, you know, throw things back at me, and, you know, I mean, I guess it's really part of her personality, but I want to retain her as a good friend because she has many good qualities, and I just find that hard to deal with, the sort of constant feedback of the, you know, questioning everything I do kind of thing.
Daniel
that might be better.
I'm sorry.
That I might be doing it better somehow, or that, whatever.
Daniel Goleman is a fellow that's done research on married couples, and he found that he could watch a married couple interact for like 5 minutes and predict how long their marriage would last. But one of the things that he described in the book is there are some things he calls perpetual problems. Okay, that is, this is not going to change. This is not going to go away. And so the quality of trying to change, her trying to change you, you trying to change her, that is almost always going to be a frustrating conversation because it's a perpetual problem if it's in that category. And so one way to do it, I have, it's funny, when you began speaking, I brought to mind a friend of mine who has a quality that irritates me conversationally, but he's a lovely man and a long friend and someone I can depend on when it matters. And I've learned to just enjoy. Occasionally, when it really grates on me, then I'll say, Jeff, I need you to stop for just a minute. This is just grating on me. I said this, and then you went here. Can you come back to here for just a minute with me? There's a way in which you can go ahead and honor the relationship and at the same time have a boundary that's fixed. Sharon Ellison talks a lot about boundaries in her book, so if you want a lot more about that, and again, remember, I find her recommendations for how to communicate extremely practical, and non-defensive is the essence of it. So take a look at that and see if you can find ways in there to interrupt the flow when a boundary is crossed and still honor the relationship. And I want to honor the time as well.
We have time for one more.
Okay.
I went back to my car one day and I found a sign that said, "Nice parking, asshole." Now, if I had been directly confronted by the person, how do you respond to just a plain insult?
So,
Did you see Robin Williams? His daughter, how his daughter responded to the bullying that she received, including some things I don't really want to mention? I don't know if you...
Go ahead and share.
It was pretty graphic, and I'm just going to leave it at that, to your imagination. And she said something about, my father is up there making the pigeons poop on your car after you washed it.
Yeah, so you can invoke a higher power, but that's not what we do here, right?
Under these circumstances.
So the thing that comes quickly to mind for me there is to remember not to take it personally. Okay, when somebody is commenting on that, then what they're likely communicating is, I would have parked in the space next to you, but there wasn't any room. Okay, and I'm so frustrated I need to let you know I think it's because of how you parked. Now, of course, they lacked the charm to say it that way, or the time perhaps, or maybe it was just more fun to say it the way they did. Felt good, like I can make the pigeons poop on your car, you've got to be careful, treat me nice. So that would be my recommendation, is the very first thing is to remember, it's not about you. It's not even about your parking. It's about the impact of a choice they believe you made on them. We have another?
When somebody says something nasty to me or insulting, one option is to say, well, thanks for sharing. They just, as you say, it's information about their view of me. It's not really about me.
Yeah.
It's really about them.
And may I respond to that just a little? So thanks for sharing can be communicated at least two ways. Thanks for sharing can feel very sarcastic, okay? And it has the effect of, there's a wall here. I am not going to be flustered by you. So, nice try, sucker. Okay, there's that thanks for sharing. And then there's the, thank you for sharing. I'm taking it in. I don't buy it. That is the part of it that's a criticism of me. I'm not buying it, but I appreciate that you felt free to express it to me. That works for me.
All right, so it looks like lunch is ready, so we're going to move to that. So join me in thanking our speakers for this great topic. Thank you.